and welcome to New Earth Era, the podcast. My name is Julie, and I'm the host of today. And our first guest will be Martin Schmalzried. Martin is an entrepreneur, political scientist, spiritual thinker, author, and music composer. After a spiritual awakening in 2018, he set up a blog, YouTube channel, and a website to share his newly guided insights with the world and help humanity transition from one worldview to another. Welcome, Martin. All right. So I was wondering if you could start telling us about your awakening experience. How did you go through your spiritual awakening?
Yeah, so basically the genesis is I'm working in a social NGO, a European social NGO, defending like the public interest, basically, which is quite broad at the European level. And that I've been doing that now for over 13 years. And my topics were mostly like digitalization and finance. And the more I sort of delved into finance and economics, I was just thinking, how can this still be holding together? How come we don't have another crisis? How come this is, I mean, and you know, when you look at all the problems in the world, whether it's climate change and all these crises, financial crisis, 2008, what the central banks are doing, what the governments are doing, I was basically more in a more like a survivalist kind of mentality. I was saying to my friends, like, we should buy, pieces of land where we're just going to farm it and learn how to hunt with bows and arrows to defend ourselves. And I was stockpiling pasta and water in my basement. Just really I was freaking out. And then my daughter was born and in 2017, and that was kind of like the thing that made me flip, because when you're scared for your own survival, that's one thing. When you're scared for the survival of your family and stuff, I was just so deep into fear that I was kind of seeking something like, just give me some hope, give me something to grab onto, because I'm losing it. Kind of.
Totally.
And so I was beginning to look at videos one after the other about plenty of topics, whether it's finance, climate change, psychology, philosophy. And in the end, I landed on this video from Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris. And I was very interested in what they were saying at the time. And they had a debate about the concept of truth. What is the truth? That was a kind of funny question from me. And I also sort of asked myself, okay, what is the truth? What is all this about? Why are we here, But in a kind of an open-ended way. And so, in the Bible, it says if you ask, you'll receive answers and things like that. And ask and you shall receive, as it says. So I asked, and then I received. So in January, it started in end of December, it already started, but then in beginning of January 2018, I just couldn't sleep anymore. And I had ideas that was pop into my head randomly, coming out of nowhere. Like a download,
you would say?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it was just an idea that was there. And typically when you have ideas, you can usually link them to something that you've read in the past, something like, it's like you make links. And here it was something that made no sense. That had no, I had absolutely no idea where all of this information came from. So I started writing it down, and I didn't sleep for about 2 weeks, or hardly slept, like an hour a night or something. I went from being an atheist, materialist, Big Bang, linear time, cause and effect, rational, blah, blah, blah person.
Did you grow up in an atheist family community, or was it more like a Christian?
No, rather atheist, or actually agnostic. Like, they weren't really into this religion thing at all. They just say, we don't know. But still, I mean, the context that I was raised in was purely materialist science, rationality, and all that stuff. And then suddenly, in 2 weeks' time, I suddenly started believing in God, and it's just a radical shift. And I just wasn't prepared for it, because I had no knowledge, no knowledge of spirituality. Like at that point, I hadn't opened a single book about spirituality in my whole life. And so it was completely scary and frightening. And I mean, the way I was seeing is I was feeling like I'm the only person awake in this whole planet, and everybody else is asleep. Yeah, that kind of feeling like you're the only one that sort of gets things, and people think you're crazy, and you know you're not crazy, but everybody. But so my wife started freaking out a bit, and in the end, she did drive me to the psychiatric emergency unit of a hospital because I was starting to lose it completely. I was saying that was like the reincarnation of Jesus. Wild. It was wild.
But initial awakening can be very, very ungrounded. You know, it can be. Oh yeah. You get lost in this very, very space. You know. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is exactly what I experienced. I was completely lost in infinity. Absolutely. And I had very poor grounding to start with. I was very much in my head, not too much in like the matter and doing things physically. So it was very hard for me. And so they just gave me like, I acted crazy for like 2 hours there, saying the end of the world is coming, and you know, I don't know what, drawing like weird things on paper saying this is the truth and it will save you and whatever. Ultimately, it just gave me like 2 sleeping pills, and I slept for like 18 hours straight. And then when I woke up, you know, then like the synchronicity started. I didn't know what a synchronicity was at the time. But basically, my wife, okay, you need to see a psychologist. So I went to see a psychologist, told her everything. She gave me this book, which was about spirituality. Never read about it. And I was like, I'm reading this, and I'm like, oh, this makes so much sense. This is exactly what I experienced. And then one thing led to another, you know, it's like these, you know, like I read that book, then I went to see that guy, and he was like more of a clairvoyant, and you know, then he set me on another path, and I discovered like YouTube channels about spirituality. I read plenty of books. I read the whole Dolores Cannon series, the whole what is it, Neil Donald Walsh, you know,
Conversation with God.
Conversations with God series. All of it just to like kind of structure and give a sense and a meaning and like a structure to what I was experiencing, because I had nothing.
Also like a validation to that what I'm going through is actually real, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it all felt like very much like one big synchronicity, one after the other. And then it was just like this kind of landing where you sort of settle into your new sets of beliefs, you know? And ultimately it's not unlike someone that went from believing in monotheism in the 15th century to suddenly discovering science, you know, because when you discover a new paradigm, you have no idea what's possible, what's not, what's real, what's not. And they have so many wild theories around, like, you know, when you read like Jules Verne or some of these, you know, early science fiction novels, you have no idea what, you know, what's possible, what's not possible. And, you know, it takes time to stabilize. So reading was really a big part of that stabilization. So that was kind of my awakening story. And funnily enough, what's funny is that then after a couple of months, my wife sort of admitted, actually, I was always talking to trees and spirits since I'm a girl, but because I was the only one, everybody thought I was crazy. So I didn't talk to anyone about this. And I'm like, wow, isn't this like destiny or something that like that we would, like that I would be the one that sort of opened her up as well. To sort of saying, okay, I'm accepting these new perceptions and stuff. Now I don't have that kind of perceptions. I just have ideas, random ideas that come to me naturally.
To you in the way it comes to you. That's also something I'm learning, that it's so like every journey is unique to every person. It's not one way for everyone, right?
Yeah, exactly. And like I totally get why, because my wife, for instance, she can talk to spirits whenever she wants to, but she has this kind of normal relationship with that. It's not like she would absolutely spend days and days meditating and channeling and whatnot. It's like, when you see a cat in the street, you don't go like chasing after it and like tell me everything. And
Yeah.
but I would be like that. I would be like that, which
Mm-hmm.
is so from my perceptions is very limited, and that's very good for me,
Yeah,
because otherwise I'd get lost in this and completely, forget about my own life and what I'm doing here.
exactly.
And so
Yeah.
it's tailor made for everyone. So sometimes I'm frustrated, like, oh, I also want to channel, I also want to do this
Yes.
and that. But then again, you remember that it's really tailor made for you, for who
Mm,
you are, for
exactly.
your own sort of. And if you have these
And your
blocks,
purpose,
don't try to
right?
force. Exactly,
Yeah,
because sometimes you would get lost, or you would like
exactly.
disembody and be gone.
Yeah, right. Yeah, letting go of that, being spiritual
Yeah,
in a specific way also, and like
exactly,
that is not,
exactly.
that is more the ego coming in, right? And trying to, yeah, project itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and try to
Wow, that's a
find your own
very,
path, sort of. Yeah.
yeah, it's a very strong awakening experience, even with the mental hospital.
Yeah. Oh, for sure,
Yeah,
for sure.
wow, interesting.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And what do you think helped you, if I can call it, like ground yourself, like um, anchor your level, your new level of consciousness into your current life? Like, what is there anything you did, or any realizations you had, or it's more like a gradual, natural process for you, or how was it?
It was more of a gradual process, I guess. Sometimes it's like with anything new,
Mm.
you can get completely obsessed with it. It can be anything. Like, for instance, you discover World of Warcraft and you spend your days, entire days, just playing it all the time. And for
Mm-hmm.
me, that was like the case. I was thinking about these existential questions and trying to get answers
Yeah,
about nonlinear time,
yeah.
simultaneity, and how time works, how everything works, how souls and all that stuff. I had so
Mm.
many questions.
Yeah,
And ultimately, the more like you get certain answers, then it's sort of you calm down and you return sort of to your human
yeah,
existence.
yeah,
And it's this realization that what we're doing here is not necessarily less spiritual than becoming an angel or something.
exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
that this life does have a specific purpose to it. That the 3D and this material reality
Mm.
is there for a reason.
Yeah,
um, and just sort of understanding what your role is in all of that, like
mm.
that's really the difficult part, because
Yeah,
you have your spiritual awakening, then you think you're kind of a messiah, you have to wake everybody up, but that's not necessarily what you're called to do. I mean, maybe
mm.
some people, yes, but that was not my case. um, and then
Yeah.
see how you can integrate that spirituality in your life,
Mm.
your daily. And
Exactly.
that's something I still have
Yeah,
troubles with. Like, I have
yeah.
answers to the big questions, like why are we
Mm.
here? What's the deeper meaning? Where is humanity going as a
Yes.
collective? But it's still hard for me to know, okay, but what is
Mm.
my
Yes.
specific role in that? And
Yeah.
ultimately, sometimes you just have to accept that it's just a journey of discovery, of self-discovery, and that's the way it
Yes.
is. And
Mm-hmm.
maybe I won't have like a definite answer, like my
Mm.
life's mission is to become this or that. But no, maybe it's just unfolding. You're just
Yes.
discovering every year. And I see it, like looking back 4 years ago. There's so many things that changed in my life that I would never have foreseen.
Mm.
And maybe that's the way it's supposed to be. Maybe it's
Yes.
not about like finding your life's mission and then just
Yes.
working at it for 40 years like a career in
Right.
a company or
Yeah.
something.
And we
But
can get
more this
very like
natural.
wrapped up in our heads about like, oh, what's my purpose? What's my mission? And then we lose
Yeah,
touch with the present moment and all the organic, intuitive guidance that comes through us right now, right? So
absolutely.
yeah. So you tapped
Absolutely.
into where humanity is going and the collective awakening. And I was wondering if you could share more your perspective on what's going on. What's the purpose of planet Earth, or where are we heading as humanity now?
Yeah, so I mean, it's hard to sum up, of course, in a few minutes. And for those
Yes.
that are really interested, I have a YouTube channel on YouTube. It's Marma Developer,
Yeah.
where I discuss these things for hours on end. So,
Okay. I'll
but
make sure to link.
just yeah, exactly. But thanks. But like basically, it's about to sum up, like the main purpose is to sort of serve as a bridge for consciousness to grow through different forms, like for instance, consciousness as a cell, and then when that cell becomes part of a global organism, then the consciousness can grow into that organism. Like your body is conscious, and then
so it's
when
merging.
multiple,
You mean
yeah,
it's like
well,
merging with its higher?
it's like the consciousness is growing with the form.
Okay.
So,
yes.
Like you have this unicellular organisms, they arrange into pluricellular organisms, and those multicellular organisms can then host a much wider portion of the universal consciousness, if you will, and have a much richer experience. And if you think of each human as being like one cell in a global collective organism, then that would allow a new kind of consciousness to emerge, which is a planetary consciousness, which would experience reality in a completely novel and amazing way, which many people call five dimensionality or 5 dimensions or whatever, 5D.
Yes.
And so it's just about consciousness doing the opposite route. Like you went from infinity and you channeled down into, like, you structured yourself downwards towards tiny little things like atoms and things like that. And then you bring consciousness back up through the experience of, the universe experiencing itself. And then that consciousness sort of envelops a larger and larger part of itself until it returns to the whole. So, imagine if in, like 300 or 400 or 500 years, humanity, which has become a collective consciousness, aware of itself and, behaving like a collective organism, then meets, extraterrestrial civilizations and stuff. And they can sort of merge and create, that would create something like a solar system becoming conscious, and then solar systems with other solar systems becoming conscious, that would create a sort of a conscious galaxy, and then conscious galaxies together would become a conscious universe or cluster of galaxies. And imagine the universe becoming conscious of itself through the experience, like really going from the ground up, knowing itself through the experience. So that's what we're doing. We're just basically bringing this consciousness upwards, lifting this consciousness upwards, so that it can envelop the entire universe at some point, billions and billions of years into the future. But so, what really helped me sort of to settle down is that this knowing that all the answers lie within, that there's nothing that you need to know outside of yourself. And, because when you have, like to understand basically how we've been programmed and what we're doing on the outside, it's just a reflection of how we function on the inside, how we're programmed on the inside. And just like, we have DNA, which is information that is in the cell, determines how it sort of, interacts on the outside, how it forms your body, for instance. Same applies to us, like the way that our own body works, the organs, the different parts of our body, and also the experience of how we grew in our mother's womb. Those two informations are sufficient to explain everything for what we've done on this planet. Whether, the way we set up the financial system, the internet being our nervous system, all of these things are just forms that we manifest on the outside from something that's programmed. Yes, but in an unconscious way. That is, we're not conscious that we're doing this, and that's why we're doing it in a way that might be dualistic or problematic, you see? Like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Like the placenta is an organ. Well, the baby and the placenta in the wombs are one global organism. They're basically linked. So they're one global organism. The placenta serves as the mediator between the mother's resources and the baby. Now, the governments, banks, all these big centralized institutions are kind of like the placenta. The human beings that are in those organisms are serving that purpose. They are the mediators between the resources of this planet and the people. And you have to go through them in order to access the resources. Like, you cannot just, live off the land or whatever, they have to go through governments, you have to go do the paperwork, you have to apply, you have to buy, you have to, hold a property title, pay your taxes and all that stuff. But the placenta doesn't know what it means to be corrupt or to be dictatorship. It just serves its purpose, its biological purpose, which is, filter the resources through so that the baby can grow. And that's all it does. But then when you add the humans on top of that, we create concepts and ideas, and we are in this duality, which we add on top of this sort of template or information. And so then you can be a government which allows your population to thrive, or you can be a terrible dictator which terrorizes your population and tries to control them. Because ultimately the placenta as an organ has life and death power over the baby. I mean, if it just said, okay, I'm not transferring any more resources, that's it.
Yes.
The baby dies.
Yeah.
It would never do that. It would never think about doing it. But when we go to the human level, we just add all kinds of ideas and concepts on top of something that is a template and dictates how we do this unconsciously. And if you look at the global history, the longer history, you can see that that's what the placenta basically has done, the banks and all that stuff. They have managed to like grow humanity exponentially to the point where now everybody is aware of everybody else, where we know we're on the same planet, we know of all the continents, we know of each other's existence. Where just 2,000 years ago, somebody that was living in France had no idea about somebody living in China or in America, or so it's like different organs not working together, not being aware of each other, you see?
Yeah. So you're saying that you mentioned that we're becoming like more one organism, and you think that's reflected in our technology, that we're so connected, like as an external manifestation of that, or?
Yeah, so basically that's a very important distinction, is distinguishing the form and what's underneath the form. Exactly. So because we have for the predominant paradigm and belief system is materialist science, then the way that we're connected is going to manifest as physical cables running around the world, or satellites and all that stuff. But if we had different sets of beliefs, it could have been telepathy, it could have been anything else.
Yes.
It's just that you have to give something a form in order to experience it. It's as simple as that. And it's not that it's bad or good, because some people would say, scratch the internet and away with science, because it's so limiting, and we should be all communicating with telepathy. But all of those things are also tailor-made for humanity. And that's something that also takes a while to accept. That basically the belief in materialist science is the perfect kind of paradigm for allowing a global organism made up of 7 billion humanoid beings to link up together and form something coherent. Yes. Because if you have 7 billion beings that are not at a very high level of consciousness, which have beliefs in evil spirits, like, and spirits and natural and all of that stuff, and do shamanic practices, then don't forget that everything is a duality. So until you're not like at a certain level of consciousness. So this means that sure, you would have tribes that would communicate positively with spirits, but you would have tribes also, or groups of people that could meditate and call bad spirits to, go and attack another tribe or something like that. Imagine that, well, of course, like the power of an organism depends on the number of people in the network. So if you look at an insect, for instance, you can think about it as a network of a number of cells. You transpose the power of a certain network to another network, it may not be very harmonious. Like, for instance, an ant can lift up to 50 times its weight.
Yeah.
Okay, that's amazing. Now imagine if you transpose that power to your level as a human. Every single human could lift up to 50 times its weight. How quickly do you think this reality would plunge into chaos? How quickly do you think a mess of this reality? And so when you have tribes of, say, a few hundred Indians that are like in America, for instance, dealing with spirits of nature, and a shaman doing these ritual dances and stuff. And sometimes they're doing it in a positive way. Sometimes they're doing some rituals to puts evil spells on a competing tribe. When you have that number of humans, that's okay. Actually, their creation is not going to really affect reality in a dramatic way. Just like an ant, is not going to affect reality in the same way as a human. But imagine if a whole country like the United States, in sync, with that kind of belief would sort of meditate and say, we, want to send a spirit to completely annihilate and kill every single, Russian or Chinese or whatever, who their rival is at the moment. That would actually have been possible with that set of beliefs. And that would mean destruction for humanity. And so science is actually the perfect paradigm for limiting our influence and our power over reality until you reach a certain level of consciousness. Because if you want to go to war with a country, through the science paradigm, you have to train people. They have to go to university. They have to become engineers. You have to open factories. You have to, transform, to have this whole industry to transform raw materials into weapons. And it's a very, very long and tedious process, as opposed to just praying and manifesting something like, an ethereal or something, like sending bad.
So we will get more access to more like metaphysical power, mental power when we ascend, which will mean that we are becoming more like one being again, right?
Yes,
so
exactly.
Then we will.
So it's that, of course, and you always have this duality. So in science, you can use a science to create a nuclear power plant or a nuclear warhead. And you see, once you've mastered sort of that balance where you sort of understand that and you use all that knowledge responsibly, and once people understand that they're part of a global organism and act accordingly, then of course, then those kind of limits can be pushed beyond, And I was always reflecting on what form that could take, but ultimately that's very premature. Because it could be, via like Star Trek, like technology, where you just understand so much of science that you can materialize, whatever you want. And you see, we're heading down that direction with 3D printing already. But you can see also, like, for instance, augmented reality, a very interesting technology. Like, imagine if people that have a higher sort of consciousness or awareness can put on these augmented reality glasses, and like focus their attention on that object, which is only virtual, and actually make it materialize itself, you see?
Manipulate it.
And the thing is, create it. The thing is, it's always very difficult to give a form to these things, because it's almost like the cells of your body trying to understand how you could get from one point of the planet to another point in a few hours. And we call that an airplane. And to us, it makes sense as humans. But to your cells, it's something magical, honestly. Because if you think of unicellular organisms in a swamp, I mean, how could they explain for them to travel from one swamp to another swamp, on the other side of the planet, is equivalent to us traveling from this solar system to, another star in the galaxy, in terms of, the distance. And so, like, try to explain to a cell of your body what an airplane is. I mean, it doesn't even have to worry about that in any case, because it's your global consciousness, your awareness as a human that is in charge of your body, that has to take care of that. They don't have to deal with that. To them, it's just natural. It's just something that's part of their experience. And to us, I mean, it's not going to be the same kind of thing, but all the people that are afraid of an artificial intelligence singularity that sort of becomes self-aware and controls all of humanity, like micromanages us, and enslaves us. That is.
You're not worried about that?
Well, no, because it's basically just a bad interpretation of how we would perceive the relationship with our own consciousness in our body and the rest of our body. Like, because most people are stuck in this belief of the intelligence in their body is just in their brain. And they unconsciously view their brain as kind of the dictator, which sends electroshocks into your whole body to sort of move your cells in place, like if they were little slaves that were obeying your every whim, like now you're
like a control management hierarchy system, right?
Exactly. And because we view that relationship as like going in one direction only, and ourselves as being sort of enslaved, like as slaves that are obeying our will as a global consciousness, then it's inevitable that we manifest those beliefs on the outside, you see? to experience them and to see if we're still okay with holding those beliefs, you see. And so if you change the perception of how your body works, if you understand that it's more like a sort of a codependence and collaboration, exactly, where the cells, they give you feedback every time, like when you sting your finger, you put it on a hot stove, you receive pain signals which completely transform your brain, of course, which shape your brain into behaving in a way where you're going to take better care of that global organism in the future. And so it's like it's really a symbiotic relationship. That's the first thing to understand, is that ultimately, you know, like what we're doing with our social media, you know, saying, this really bugs me, or this really annoys me. It's kind of like one of your cells saying, you know, I have back pain, or this is painful, and I don't like this, you know, informing a global collective organism about, okay, let's try and change things so that you feel more comfortable. You know, when you have back pain, you're trying to find a more comfortable position in your chair. And so who's the boss? Are you the boss, or is your back the boss, you know, saying, I have back pain, please move, you know?
The body is intelligent, and it's,
and that intelligence is in your entire body. So now we know, for instance, that we have neurons in our heart, we have neurons in our guts, but also, you know, that when you break your leg, it's not like your brain is sending, you know, instructions on how the bone should heal and mend together. It's something that's inherently, like, the intelligence is there. It's in your leg. It's not in your brain. And so changing our beliefs will change the experience we have on the outside. But what I mean about this singularity in artificial intelligence is that it's taking that form because it's the only way that we can right now, with the global sort of understanding and that we have about reality, and the fact that science is the predominant way of looking at reality, it's the only form that we could give to a consciousness that would emerge from 7 billion brains being like one neuron, you know, so to speak.
Yeah. So you have been working on a project called Collective Stewardship, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so basically I'll put it into context. So after you realize that you're part of a global collective organism, then it's about, okay, how do you actually act on that knowledge in a conscious way and like sort of manifest that on the outside reality. And I've been like looking at, so if the financial system is our circulatory system, how can we make it so that it works in the same way as our own circulatory system? That is a kind of distribution of energy to all of the body in a universal kind of way, you know, like sort of unconditional love that your body has for each part of your body. So every single cell receives the amount of energy it needs and requires to grow and to thrive and to be able to do what it's supposed to do. If your skin cells, for instance, don't receive the amount of oxygen they need to carry out their function and the nutrients and all of that stuff, then you start having, you know, peeled skin, dead skin, all kinds of issues and problems. And the same for every single one of your organism. And it's also nothing that you as a human can understand in terms of, you know, like you have all this debate about, you know, communism, for instance, is one extreme where, you know, we try to determine what the need of each human is and standardize it. And capitalism is another extreme where we just say, okay, so like leave it to the market, and maybe some people are useless and they should go die under a bridge, and other people can become multi-billionaires, and that's fine. And there's like a middle ground between those two mechanisms where when you understand that intuitively, like for instance, when you start running, energy focuses into our legs to support that activity. And then when you stop running, then energy is diverted elsewhere as you do other things. If you start thinking, then it goes to your brain, and all that happens seamlessly. How do you replicate that on the outside? And of course, that is a very difficult thing to do. And so it's about trying to find which way sort of you can attack that and try to replicate this kind of unconditional love mechanism and decentralized, like almost spontaneous or magical kind of way that your body functions, distributes resources and allocates resources. Is very, very fascinating, actually, how it works, and trying to replicate that sort of collective, decentralized global intelligence on the outside.
Okay.
And so, but the thing is, the financial system, I think, is not at that point where we can make that switch yet, because, you know, it will take a couple of more years. So what was the first thing that I could try to think of that we can already work on right now to try to manifest that collective global intelligence? And then came an idea, which was that humans really, what we really need right now is a new way to sort of collectively manifest together, to have that experience of thousands of people getting together and co-creating something. Now, crowdfunding is one great example of how that can work. And it has worked really successfully. Like, you have people that are saying, this is an idea I want to bring to the world. I don't have the funds. If you like it, please support me. And it's amazing, the innovations that we've seen through crowdfunding. Ultimately, like, ironically, for instance, the Oculus Quest that is now that is in the hands of Facebook started as a crowdfunding initiative. That the VR headset, you know. And there's so many other examples of like crowdfunded technologies where have made it into the mainstream, and might not have made it into mainstream without that kind of system. And so. But I wanted to try and find some way to do it like more locally for people, to make the link between creating something tangible and physical in their own vicinity, like their city or something. And right now there only exists like two main types. Like either land is private, quote unquote, so it's in the hands of someone retains its property title. And you can create like even like cooperatives where that property is distributed among a certain number of people, but it's still private property. And so those people are in charge and decide what you do with a piece of land. Like, if they want to open it up to the public, they can. If they want to close it, they can. If you want to put a fence around it, they can. Or it's public land, and then it's in the hands of the government or the local government, you know, and if they want to build something there, they can do it. But it's really in their hands. And of course, then citizens can try to petition and try to put pressure. But you know how it is with local governments. I mean, they're always short of cash, and things take a lot of time, and everything is very slow, political. And eventually when things do get done, it might not correspond to what the people expected. And you have so many things like politics in there. And so it's really, it's a frustrating way of manifesting together, because you're doing it through a body which is supposed to represent you, but the kind of link between voting and what people do with your vote once they're in power is kind of more and more kind of disconnected, you see. Even though you have to, it's true that there are many local governments that are trying to revive democracy, but I find that even that reaches a certain number of limits. So what my idea is to create a new kind of ownership of the land, where you would have a sort of a corporation, if you will, that buys the land and it owns the land titles, but can do nothing with the land. Basically, it gives all of the usufruct, or the way that you can like do things on the land. It gives that away to people. So if you have a town with 10,000 people, that corporation buys the land and then gives 10,000 tokens or way of voting or whatever rights, you know, to vote on what to do on that land to the people unconditionally. They don't have to pay anything. It's just that piece of land is in your town. You live in that town. You can do whatever you want on that piece of land. It's yours to use. And the corporation cannot sell the land. It only holds the property, but it can do nothing with it, basically. It has no power. Only the people, if they decide that they're not interested and they want to resell it, then, you know, the corporation then has a permission to put it back on the market for sale.
What would be the incentive for the corporations to do this? Is it like goodwill?
So the initial idea behind it was to raise money through an ICO. Like, imagine you collect, 100 million euros worth of Ethereum, for instance. Then you distribute like tokens that are equivalent to an ownership of that huge, you know, pile of money to the people that invested, like in the form of an NFT or something. And that Ethereum is then staked to generate about 4%, you know, return per year. And with those 4%, you keep buying new pieces of land, you see? So you never actually spend the initial money that you collected through the ICO. You only spend the interest on the money. So for somebody that funds the ICO, the one incentive is ultimately, if I'm not doing anything with my Ethereum, I may as well give it to that ICO or that corporation, because they're not going to touch that Ethereum, so my money is not going to lose any value, but they're going to buy land with it. And if the community decides to sell that land, then I'll receive the proceeds from the sales, depending on how much I contributed. So if you own like 1/100th of that huge corporation, and every time a land is sold, for instance, because people are not interested anymore or whatever, you receive 1/100th of the proceeds of the sale. And then there are plenty of other incentives that I was thinking about. But I'm not going to get into too many technical things. So that it's really at the stage of an idea and a project, but it was really interesting to see the synchronicities as well, because I've just had a conversation a week ago with one of the people that is at the heart of a project that's called Seeds. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yes.
It's a whole community that's built a sort of a whole bunch of tools, governance tools and tools for co-creating in a cryptocurrency on the Telos network. And they do all kinds of things, whether it's like managing, like revitalizing the land, and they also they had exactly the same idea. They call it, instead of collective stewardship, they call it common stewardship, but it's the same principle. It's like taking back the ownership of the land and moving away from this idea of private property and
It's related to real estate and properties, or is it related to other things as well in this sense?
So collective stewardship in this sense. So the reason I'm mentioning Seeds is that ultimately, and I'll discuss this further with Rieki, for instance, is his name. I'll discuss this further with him and his community, but the idea would be maybe to leverage the tools that they already have at their disposal, because they have an application, they have tools for collective governance, so for a collective sort of community to make decisions collectively with all kinds of different parameters. I mean, they're very advanced in the way that we're thinking about all these things. So if I could just leverage those tools and see how it's compatible with this idea of raising capital, then that would be amazing. And so the idea is, so for me, like the reason I'm talking about this is because there's this element of we're trying to have control or conditionality, you see, in many ways. Like, for instance, people that are scared about climate change and sustainable development, they want to make sure that when people get together, it is for a specific purpose. So you have to do permaculture on the land, or you have to do this or that, or my vision is a bit more. Yeah, my vision is a bit more neutral. I'm more of like saying, give the people the tools to co-create together on this piece of land, and if they transform it into a dump where they just put their waste there, hey, that's their collective decision. But they will then see the link between what they've decided together and the consequence directly. Yes. Whereas what's happening now is that you put your waste, for instance, goes to third world countries, and that's where it stinks, that's where it imposes, that's where it's affecting all those people there, but it's not affecting you in your community directly. You see, it's kind of hidden. This kind of cause and effect is kind of hidden, and it's starting, of course, to be less and less hidden because the big garbage patch in the ocean, and you see you see the consequence of the trash. Even if you're trying to stash it and hide it and put it in third world countries, it's still starting to sort of
it's in the global body that you spoke about, right?
Yes, and so the thing is, it's really important for me to have this thing be as neutral as possible, because we can't afford basically to skip the learning part. Yes, the learning part with trial and error, of people trying to create something together. And even if it's something that is not necessarily good for the land, at least they'll learn something from it. If you try to frame it too much, then I mean, to me, it's not how
your own. Yes, I love
your
that.
Body doesn't. Your body doesn't judge. Like it would feed cancer cells the same way that it feeds any other cell. You see, it's just this unconditional love kind of envelope
for everything. Allows whatever wants to come through. Yes.
exactly.
That's
And then you have to
beautiful.
have this kind of trust that on a global scale, it will amount to something
Yes.
coherent. But you're not in control of that.
Yes.
So
Surrender the
so
control.
it's
Yeah.
yeah. Exactly. But there's a balance, of course, to be struck. And I'm not saying that projects that have a certain fixed outcome are not, shouldn't be part of this, because they definitely should. Just like, you have diversity is really what we need right now, that's for sure. But I'm just trying to explicit like the way that my vision in terms of the collective stewardship, how I see it, and maybe how other people see it. And there's room for all of those kind of solutions. So it shouldn't be either or, it should be both, really.
Yeah.
And then it's up to people to select, which one they prefer, or, so it's really important to cultivate that diversity. So that's also
so it will
very
become
important.
a co-creation. And my question was, what do you imagine the land being used for? But it can be anything. Whatever the people, the owners want to, or the community wants to.
Yeah, so ultimately the way that I was envisaging things is it's very hard to reach out to citizens anyways. So you have to do it. So a bit of context, like rewind a bit. So we're supposed to be born as a collective global organism. How can that actually manifest on the outside? And there are many ways. Like for instance, in some countries, what you do in modern Western states, what they do typically is they cut the umbilical cord, and that's it, which is a very abrupt transition. And that's kind of, when people talk about the Great Reset, everything collapsing, the financial system going bust and all that stuff, that is ultimately the same. It's the same kind of thing. You see, it's abruptly switching from one system to another system, being fed via the placenta, all of your resources. And then suddenly the baby, has to switch to a completely other way of, functioning, another source of energy, like via the lungs, via the digestive system and milk and all that stuff. And what happens typically is in the first 3 or 4 days, the baby, or weeks even, the baby loses about 10% of its body weight because of that abrupt transition from one energy source to another. Now, 10% of the baby's cells, that means that there's more cells that die than are born, basically. Take that to the level of humanity. If we're 7 billion, 10% is 700 million people. Imagine 700 million people dying. And I imagine that would be about accurate if like the financial system and the energy grid and all those things sort of collapse because of whatever cataclysm.
If it happens like this.
Then then you have to sort of find new ways of functioning very quickly. That would probably be, and don't forget that like for the baby, like 2 or 3 days, when you scale that up to our experience as a global collective organism, that may be 2 or 3 decades, you see? So time is completely different. Like 9 months in the womb is for us like, I don't know, 20,000 years on this planet, so the time is like, you have to think about time in a much stretched kind of way. So subjectively to the cells of the baby, 2 or 3 days is the equivalent of 20, 30 years for us, as humans. And then there are other practices which are very interesting, such as lotus birth. So lotus birth is you keep the placenta attached and all of the resources can keep flowing from the placenta to the baby. And the baby basically gets rid of the placenta after 4 or 5 days once the cord is kind of, dried out and stuff. And what they found in preliminary research is that the transition is much less abrupt, and the baby doesn't have that kind of, weight loss. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And so that's why also I'm trying to...
A smoother transition for humanity. Yeah.
Exactly. So basically, if you think of our governments as the placenta, I'm not the kind of person that would say, screw the governments, let's do our own decentralized autonomous thing because they're the old world and I don't want them, and I'll just do my thing and it's better and the older system is bad and stuff. So my way of doing it is I would reach out to local governments, of course. That's what I'm talking about, this whole thing, and going backwards, and trying to do it in partnership with the local governments that are open to that new kind of idea of experimenting, because they will be facilitating the process.
Yes.
And also reaching to local
instead of fighting. Yes.
Exactly, because they also have the possibility to reach the 10,000 people in your city in a much much greater extent than you as an individual driving around and putting little papers in everybody's mailbox. Imagine.
Yes.
They have sort of magazines, they have ways of communicating with the population that you just don't have. And the same with like local organizations that, so once we buy a piece of land, what I would do basically is reach out first to local organizations that would love to have an idea, that have plenty of ideas for what they would love to see, whether it's citizens organizations or permaculture or organic farming or whatever. And the first project to be voted in would be proposed by these organizations because they already have like an idea of what they want, you see? Yes. And so that would give citizens a kind of a preview of the potential of this tool for them to create and do things together. And doing it with organizations because they're just much more experienced and motivated, and then just leave it up to citizens. So if you have like a piece of land that is, 1,000 square meters, then 100 square meters can be used for organic farming, and that's open to everyone, and can contribute. Everybody can come and take those, fruits or vegetables or whatever they're growing. And like when people see that, they're like, oh, okay, so I can actually ask for a children's playground to be built or a meeting place for us to meet and organize events with other citizens. And
it will be like a voting system for the community.
Yes. And that's where Seeds comes into play, because they have all those tools. They're developing all those tools and they're making them available open source. So it's really a really interesting community and set of tools. So that's why I'm really happy that I met one of the founders. And to connect with them. So to try and see the synergies that can be built between my vision for what collective stewardship looks like and their vision. So that's looking forward to that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So do you imagine this being built on blockchain, or is it being connected to blockchain in some way, or how?
Yeah, so absolutely.
Is the technology behind it? Yes.
Yes. The blockchain would be definitely technology behind it. The way that I see it is basically, I would love for each of these organizations, like they're called decentralized autonomous organizations in the jargon of the blockchain. So you can imagine every city as a decentralized autonomous organization, where if you have 10,000 citizens living there in that town, they have 10,000 sort of tokens or voting rights on controlling that decentralized autonomous organization, the funds that it holds, and each person can submit a proposal, and that decentralized autonomous organization would also hold all the funds that are collected in Euro, in Ethereum, in Bitcoin, and whatever other currency. And they would be really self-managed. So it would have nothing to do with what I'm doing, like they could really be completely separate from me. Ideally, what I would prefer is, I was telling that the corporation would hold the property titles of the land. What I would like is ultimately for those local decentralized autonomous organizations to buy those properties back, adjusted to inflation, so you have like a very simple sort of calculation of the amount of money that you spent to buy that land, and adjusted to inflation, and you just sell it back to them for that price. And so they're fully autonomous and completely outside of your control, or there's just, they're also owning the land that they're collectively kind of building on in a very democratic and decentralized way, because when 10,000 people quote unquote own a land, then nobody really owns it. It's really like a common kind of stewardship. That's why I call it stewardship. And so ultimately what I would love also then to see is if like you have 10 or 20 cities that have local DAOs that are completely fully autonomous, they make links between each other and they say, you know what, we have all these excess funds. Let's buy a land for another city that may be there and set up a DAO there. And then it just sort of starts rolling, you see, and more lands can be bought, and it just lives its life without me, you know, as the person, the master puppeteer, you know, controlling everything. Because I have many other projects that I want to work on, and I don't want to spend my life just on this. I just want this to have a life of its own, and then grow and expand without me having to be at the helm. So,
beautiful. So what other projects are you working on now that you're mentioning?
So I have a book that's going to be published in French, though, on, you know, this whole vision of the relationship between inside and outside. So to give a sort of a frame to what we're experiencing, you know, talking about the future of the financial system, the internet, artificial intelligence, the stuff that we talked about, plus going a bit more into depth. And the main purpose is first of all, for humanity to stop hating itself, because that's one of the biggest problems, I think, is that we look at our past and we're there, you know, like saying, oh, we were so bad, this was horrible, we did these horrible things and all that stuff. But ultimately, if you see it as just a misfortunate or sort of replication on the outside of things that we didn't really understand about ourselves on the inside, then all of this growth is kind of flawless if you think about it in a way. And once you see it that way, and you see it as a natural sort of evolution and growth, you stop fighting the past, and that really frees you and liberates you in terms of your imagination to build something new. So that's one of the purposes. I have 2 children's books also that I'm working on right now that are being illustrated. I've drafted them. It's about, hopefully they'll be in English as well, because I can translate them myself, but you know, a 300-page book is something that I wouldn't have the time to translate. But they would be about spirituality for kids, you know, to sort of have I have 2 children now. The oldest one is like turning 5 soon, and so I'm thinking, you know, how can you start talking about, you know, God and spirituality in a different way than the way that it's been depicted in the Bible, or, you know, that is less mystifying and more sort of intuitive for them.
And it also comes more natural to children, because they still have that sort of, they still live more in this intuitive spiritual way. They're more connected to source as they come, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's things that I'm working on. I have this consultancy that I've created where I try to make the link between things like blockchain and spirituality and how it sort of ties all together. So I've created a 5-part modules training, you know, just for people to understand blockchain, understand what the money is, how the financial system works, and what it entails for the future, you know. So
and the spiritual concepts behind it.
Yes, exactly. So that's the last module. So it's like 5 modules. It's like understanding money and blockchain, understanding the financial system and economics, how it works, you know, why blockchain is so important today. Then looking at the different crypto assets that exist, you know, and the different ones, like what's the purpose. The 4th one is how to invest, like the practical things, like opening up an account on an exchange platform and all that stuff. And the 5th one is tying it all together.
Or is it for corporations?
It's for anyone. It's for anyone that wants a sort of a huge, like a bigger frame on this whole topic and understanding it in a broader context, like why blockchain is important, how it works, how to invest in it. And also this spiritual dimension that is not just about profits and making money, but it's part of a larger kind of evolution for the financial system. And with that consultancy service, I mean, I'll send you the link as well. You can maybe link it to the video. It's called Humanity. Like, it's a play on words, like you have you as you instead of like humanity. And then at the end, it stops with ET, you know, like ET, like extraterrestrial, because so it's humanity.life. And there I'm trying to sort of have to build a lot of different tools, trainings and all that stuff to facilitate this transition from, you know, for humanity moving from one paradigm to another paradigm and sort of understanding, having new vision for reality. So there's plenty of things I'm working on in parallel. It takes a lot of time, but
bridging economy and finance with spirituality is a huge topic. So it's
for sure. Also compose music on the side, so it's like one of my hobbies, still doing that. So that's
what
also
type of music
part of
is
my
that?
activities.
What type of genre?
So Yeah, so I mostly love classical music, but right now I'm especially composing music for video games, interactive music for video games. So
Okay.
that's one of my hobbies. So
Mm.
yeah, very busy life, but
With
it's also
family,
very
music,
very
yeah, a rich life.
yes,
Yeah,
trying to
absolutely.
reconcile everything. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right. Last, I want to ask you, where can people find you? I will make sure to link in the description.
Yeah. So basically, the best thing is I'll send you a link to a website that I created under my own name. So it's martinschmalzried.com, because ultimately
Mm.
we're all multidimensional human beings. We all do a million things. And, before everybody was like sort of chopping things up and compartmentalizing things. And I'm doing this
Yes.
here in this corner. And so I
Yes.
try to create a website which brings together all of my activities to say, okay,
Mm.
I do this, I do political blogging and spiritual talk,
Yes.
and I write books, I do music. And
Mm.
so, if you go on that website, then you have quick access to other websites where
Yeah.
it's
There find anything.
so it's all of my work is centralized there. And so it's easier to find me via that portal.
Perfect. All right.
Yeah.
Is there anything more you want to share before we wrap up?
No, this was great. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you so
So
much. And I talk to you soon.
perfect. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Bye bye. Yeah.
Bye.